So I'm starting right at 1750? Or no, 05, I got it.
You guys are live, so you can start right now.
Welcome to another episode of the Recruiting Masters, brought to you by the CFC Insider. I'm here with Jim, I'm here with Gord. We're gonna dive into another week of football, both, well, amateur for that matter. We're gonna talk about some high school players of the week. We're gonna talk about some CJIP players of the week. And then we're gonna talk about a young man who just randomly out of nowhere got a scholarship offer from the University of Virginia, and it's his first one out of nowhere. So we'll touch base with that, and then we'll get into our recruiting tip, which we started last week, but we need to expand on. So to get things started, like we always do, we're gonna talk about the offensive player of the week, and he's from the Maritimes, which is maybe the second time this high school season the players come from the Maritimes. His name is Cairo Barry. He's from Dartmouth High School. He's the class of 2019. He had 12 carries for 235 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. He also had 3 receptions for 75 yards and 1 receiving touchdown. And then basically I added that together because I need a calculator. Gord won't. He had 328 yards from scrimmage and 5 touchdowns. So basically he had 15 touches for 328. I'll leave that to Gord to figure out the math.
Well, I was just impressed that you managed to add the 4 touchdowns and the 1 touchdown together. That was good.
22 yards a touch?
Yeah, sounds about right.
Give or take.
Yeah.
I mean, what impresses me is that he's putting up stats as a runner and a receiver, and especially when you're looking towards the U Sports level, that's such an important skill for running backs to have. I mean, you've got kids that can tote the rock in a lot of different places across the country, but if you have a kid that can add value as a receiver as well, you can even maybe line him up out of the backfield and use him that way as well. I mean, that's the type of weapon that U Sports schools are looking for, because the reality is that you can be a stud running back, but you provide so much more value to a Canadian football team if you are able to, whether you're coming out of the backfield or lining up out of the backfield, that versatility is just such a big part of the skill set for a running back.
Anthony Coombs, Nick Dembski. I'd even go back to Andre Drury.
Yeah, those hybrid type guys. I mean, what was the other guy that came out of York that played for the Argos for a number of years?
It's Andre Drury.
It's Andre Drury. Yeah.
No, anyway, whatever. I was thinking of somebody else, but yeah. I mean,
Johnson?
Yeah.
Oh, Jeff Johnson?
Jeff Johnson.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He was a good
sure.
one. Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, so I mean, those kinds of guys. I mean, not just at the university level, but up into the pros. I mean, there's a lot of potential there, and if Cairo can keep developing that skill set, then he just adds to the value for himself. You know, those maritime provinces sometimes tend, especially Nova Scotia, those guys tend to kind of stay in house. They don't often leave the province, so it'd be interesting to see if he ends up AUS. You know, where he's used, but one thing the AUS has had over the last number of years, pretty good history of running backs. You know, Jordan Sosolichuk at St. Francis Xavier right now, Dale Wright at Acadia, Chris Reed at Mount Allison. You know, there's been some really good running backs come through those AUS ranks, so it'll be interesting to see where he winds up.
Yeah, and there's always athletes coming out of Dartmouth. I can think of, well, you know what, just coaching at Acadia all those years, there is always athletes coming out of Dartmouth, and they'll head to the AUS school, they'll develop late, or they end up at Champlain Regional College in Lennoxville, Quebec. Anyways, moving along, defensive player of the week. One of my favorite defensive players or athletes, he's from Saskatchewan. His name is Cody Gutek. He is the CFC 100, and he is the class of 2020, so he has another year left. Anyways, this last weekend, Gutek had 10 tackles, 3 TFLs, he had 2 forced fumbles, he had 1 fumble recovery, and he had a pick 6. So basically 4 turnovers, 13 total tackles. So anyways, he was a scoring machine and a one-man stop unit.
Haven't seen that particular film. Was that a weather-aided performance for him?
Like
that's a lot of turnovers to force.
Yeah.
So
well, it is Saskatchewan. It is, you know, the prairies. It is the end of, what are we at? It is
it's the beginning of November.
It's the beginning of November. So yes. So I'm going to assume.
It's also 2018.
And we're also going to assume that playing at Martinsville, he's playing 12-man ball, right?
Yes,
Because there's all different types of ball throughout Saskatchewan.
Yeah, and you know what? If you really look into it, you can actually find some athletes. I'm sure Sask or Regina, when they do their in-house recruiting or their in-province recruiting, they hit every level of that going on the way down. But he's a young man who really jumped out. I saw him play in the summer. I saw his junior film. outstanding prospect. Long, lean, the kind of frame you can fill out. Could be a free, could be a Sam, or you could really fill him out. He could be an inside linebacker. Moving along, the next young man, or the next two anyways, the next young man is from St. Thomas More, which is in BC or Burnaby.
The Burnaby, BC version, not the, was the Hamilton the other one?
The Hamilton version. Yeah. That would be the number 1 ranked team in the CFC50. Daniel Auld, he's a defensive end / outside linebacker. He's not the heaviest set guy, but he really jumped out to us when we watched this film. And the fact that he's labeled as a defensive end, we were like, this is the guy this week. So he plays at STM. He had 6 tackles, not such a big deal. He had 5 quarterback sacks. That is a big deal. And he had 5 TFLs. So that's a pretty good day for any rush end outside linebacker in that kind of 3-4 defense that STM runs.
You know, really explosive getting off the ball. He's able to knife through a lot of blocks at the first level. And when you're in a 3-4 system as an outside backer, often a little maybe undersized, coming up and playing on the edge there at the line of scrimmage, you know, that is such a key skill to have. And, you know, those can provide some struggles for linemen that are used to blocking bigger, slower bodies when you can bring a skinnier guy. I should give him full credit, a skinnier guy down at the line of scrimmage and have him come not just off the edge, but I saw a couple where he slanted inside on these two. So you know, really liked his get off the line of scrimmage.
Yep, I haven't seen him play since they played week 1 against Notre Dame when they basically blew out Notre Dame. I think it was 30-0, and he really jumped out on film at that point. So I'm good to see he followed it up and had a solid season. Moving along. Speaking of Notre Dame, which the athlete of the week, who is actually their quarterback, we've categorized him as an athlete this week because I'm not sure where he fits in at the next level. However, Will Clark, their quarterback, who I think was just named a provincial all-star.
Not provincial yet, but he will be. He's the conference offensive MVP for that AAA Western Conference. Probably the best conference in BC high school football, top to bottom, I'd say. And Will Clark being the diamond of that conference this year, he's been fantastic. And I remember when I was still with you at New West, we played against them last year, and he was a kid that stood out then and just about single-handedly kept them in that game against our squad that would end up being the provincial champions. So just a really dynamic kid, and I know at that point in time was still learning how to play quarterback. And I think that's still a process he's going through right now, but he's certainly looked a lot more polished this year. He's got a really good coach for those kinds of things in Dennis Kelly, one of the legends of high school football coaching out in this neck of the woods. So that's a really good system for him to grow under, but I'm interested to see where he ends up at the next level as well.
What year is he in?
He's 2019, so he's coming out this year.
Yeah.
They have a nice little stable of prospects this year. There's the running back, Tion. There's Cameron Ma. There's the receiver, Gerald Cummings, and then there's obviously there's Will. Will just to fire out his stats for 2 weeks ago. It was a South Delta game that went into overtime, and they scored close to 100 points between the two teams. Anyways, he ran basically that QB power read they run. He is a quarterback who ran 19 times for 190 yards, 10 yards a crack.
Nice math.
He also scored 5 rushing touchdowns, and then when he wasn't running over the South Delta defense, no offense, Ray, he went 12 for 17 for 166 yards and 2 passing touchdowns. And then he played a little D where he had 6 solos and 1 forced fumble. So, I mean, I really like this guy. I don't know where he's going to fit in. He's kind of the tweener. He's not super tall, but he is super athletic. Is he a quarterback? Is he a DB? He's obviously a playmaker. So, anyways,
Yeah,
sounds
I
like
wonder
you
if he
just
ends up being a
described.
slot.
It sounds like you just described Trey Ford to me. That's out of Waterloo.
Yeah.
same type
Very good
athlete.
point.
He's got some shape
that's,
too.
It always bothers me as a guy that pays close attention to university football in this country, where you have guys come out and they go, oh, well, that build doesn't quite line up. I don't know if this kid's a quarterback. Like, look, if you want to guarantee that a dynamic playmaker touches the ball every play, then keep him a quarterback. Yeah. I mean, gosh, there are 15 U Sports programs that could use a guy like that under center right now, at least.
And when given the opportunity, the arc of development can be pretty steep for some of these players, like Trey Ford. He turned into a quarterback this year.
That being said, I mean, there can be some hurdles, but I think a good comp is Theo Landers, another Notre Dame Burnaby grad, a guy who's, I think, still safe to say, still kind of figuring out how to pass at the U Sports level, but is still getting the job done at Guelph. I mean, we've talked about it in our show at length, but I mean, all of a sudden they're in the 8th Cup, And we're sitting there looking at his numbers and his performance and going, well, it's not quite what we're expecting from a quarterback at this level, but yet he adds the plays with his feet and gets the job done. And next thing you know, they're in the Final 8 across the country. I mean, any team in the country, if you're not Western Calgary, Laval, Montreal, is going to be clamoring for that kind of performance in a season. So, I mean, that's I think there's potential there to keep the kid. Honestly, I mean, you put the kid where he wants to be, and I think you work with him wherever he's willing to be.
Yeah, and the biggest thing for that type of quarterback, and you're talking about Trey, is defending the broken play. Like, as a defensive coordinator, it's like, okay, are we going to spy him? Like, we talked about this last week. Sure, go ahead and spy him, but he ran it 19 times for 190 yards. Like, okay, so you're...
Well, and here's the thing.
It's a broken play.
If you look at those numbers as a passer, 12 for 17 is a good completion percentage. You know, he's clearly making the reads and doing the things that he needs to do in the passing game as well. So whether that translates directly to the next level without there being a learning curve, I can't say, but he's clearly got some potential in that area too, to sit in the pocket and deliver footballs.
Oh, I've watched his film as a quarterback, and he actually has nice timing, and he actually sets his feet, and he throws the ball, and you can tell he's going through a progression of some sort. So he's actually going through the process of being a high school quarterback, other than just like pre-reading and letting it sail. Like, he's actually reading and throwing, on top of the fact that he's super athletic. So, but those are our players of the week. We're going to move along. We're going to talk about a couple of CFC 100 top performances and some other performances. The first one that really jumped out was Miller played Leboldus in Regina for the city championship this past weekend. There's a DB on Miller, Carson Sombach, who is probably one of the more impressive technical DBs coming out in the class. I believe he's 2019. So he actually helped Miller with the big victory. He rushed for 19 carries for 169 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 4.5 tackles. I believe he plays halfback in a little corner, but he had 5 knockdowns. 6 knockdowns. So, I mean, that went a long way against Leboldus, who's a really well-balanced team who usually has a pretty established passing game for high school football.
Interesting that he'd be targeted that often as a guy that obviously is a standout defensive back at that particular level, to even be able to record 5 or 6 knockdowns. I mean, you talk at the next level, and those elite guys are the guys that you just stay away from. So, you know, obviously he got challenged in this game and stepped up to the plate.
Well, when we were breaking down the CFC 100 this year, we actually we kind of put the DBs into a list, and we sent them off to a former CFL coach who's a DB guy, and we had him, we were just rank them. So we brought him back, so we look at the list, and he actually had Carson above several NCAA prospects in just off film alone. Like, he didn't know about height, weight, measurables, but he just saw the actual DB play, and he had him above a lot of the ones who are basically getting interest from all over Canada and from down the States. So that's kind of a credit to Carson, who's a technician, which is not that surprising when they come from Saskatchewan.
Well, attention, Stephen Bryce, you got to reinforce that wall around Regina for your recruiting.
Try harder. So, anyways, moving
if
along.
they come straight out of high school, they probably won't have eligibility issues. So that's cool.
Not touching that. Okay, moving along, you got an athlete who plays quarterback. I don't know if he'll be a quarterback at the next level, and I apologize for saying that, Javon. However, Javon Blake, he's from Rutland. He is also a CFC 100. He's class of 2020, and he was recently awarded
the MVP for his conference in BC High School football. So.
Well, what about that process? Tell us about that process.
I was telling
we
these
talked
guys
about
off the
this
air.
off camera.
I was telling these guys off the air a little insider information on this one before we started. Is that I'm a head coach in the same conference, and worth noting. By the way, I'll put it out there. Our team lost by 40 points to Rutland, and Javon didn't play a snap in that game. So we were not quite at that level. But in that all-star meeting, we sat down, and the first thing you do is you start by identifying who the offensive MVP is. So teams will suggest their player for offensive MVP, and then if they don't get the MVP, then they get pushed down to the position all-stars. Yep. So we sat down and we're like, okay, well, first order of business is so who's everybody got for their offensive MVP? And the 5 coaches in the room in unison went, Javon. All right, well, moving on.
Which is not hard to I honestly.
Well, and what's impressive about that, too, is that because of that ankle injury he was battling, he only played 5 games and little parts of a 6th. And so, I mean, he was runaway because he's so dynamic.
He's awesome. He's an awesome athlete.
And honestly, I mean, it's because that conference is kind of a half step below the top conferences in AAA, they rarely get a lot of respect for provincial MVP. Like that kid usually is on the All-Star team, but is never the MVP coming from that conference. This kid's legit, and he is in that conversation. And I mean, unfortunately, because the season's short, I think that might be the difference. If he played all 8 games this season, all 9 games this season, he would be the provincial MVP. And there's little doubt in my mind on that question.
Yep. Well, I've been impressed with him. I saw him a year ago and was like, oh, he's only in grade 10. This was a year ago. And then I just saw him run, and I saw him do some movement drills on a field, and I was just like, he's a legitimate, I think, legitimate NCAA prospect.
Yes. Well, you look at the pedigree there, too. Yep. His older brother is, I think his name's Jerome Blake, who was on the Canadian 4x100 team in Rio, apparently. So, pretty decent athletic bloodlines. I know the family's from Jamaica, so that country's known for producing athletes, too.
Just a bit. So
yeah, just a bit, yeah.
He's not on our offer, that guy, who we'll talk about in a sec, but offer the guy.
Well, and the big question for him going into his one more year of high school at a school that's kind of off the radar, can they keep him in-house? Is he going to stay there? That's the big question. I mean, maybe there's a small part of me as an opposing coach that hopes that he doesn't, but on the larger scale, I really hope that he does, because he's just been so huge for that program.
Oh, yeah.
And there's actually a decent supporting cast around him, too. So, unfortunately, their season's over. They didn't make the playoff cut. But I would, in the big picture, I would really enjoy seeing him stick around and see what he can do for that Rutland program.
Speaking of bloodlines, I see a Mcdonald again. And I heard that he was on the sideline in Calgary watching a Dinos game very, very recently.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, last week he went 30 for 40 for 326 yards and 4 touchdowns. So,
I assume that Wayne Harris gets invited to the family reunions.
Yeah, I would
point.
think so. I think he might
at
be
this point, is that the number 3?
Yeah,
Potentially?
He could be.
Potentially.
Yeah, no, I think he's slinging steaks at the family barbecue these days.
Not surprising. Ben is a CFC 100 class of 2020 as well. So, I mean, he's got quite a bit of time before he actually moves on. But, yeah, he had another outstanding performance. He's, in my opinion, one of the top 3 quarterbacks in BC high school football right now in the 19, 20, or 21 at this point. So I really like Ben Mcdonald.
Tough mantle, tough position he stepped into at South Delta, coming off the heels of Michael Calvert, a guy who was a pretty sought-after U Sports recruit, and you know that South Delta program's kind of, as a team, has taken a little bit of a step back this year. They've kind of fallen back a little bit in that very competitive Western Conference, but it hasn't been due to a lack of performance from Ben Mcdonald. And you know, we've talked about that offensive system there. You know, it's a system that really enhances a quarterback's abilities, and Ben's really taken full advantage of that. So,
the South Delta, for me, the BC high school playoffs are starting this next week. I think South Delta and Mount Doug are probably two of the more dangerous teams in the province because of the quarterback with the broken play. And
they always seem to be too. Because we felt that way last year too, didn't we?
Yeah.
I mean, they always seem to be that team that you're just like, I get that they lost 3 conference games or 4 conference games or whatever, but I just don't want to run into them at this time of year because it's a good, strong coaching staff, and they've always got athletes that have the ability to take over the game.
Yeah, and they play hard. They play hard. Both teams play extremely hard.
Yes.
Next one, moving along, he's new to the CFC 100 list. Also class of 2020. His name is Nolan Alm. He is from Kelowna. Plays for Coach Cartwright. I see the next coming of Ed McCaffrey. This is a big, tall, long, lean kid who actually is a dominant receiver. I saw him play in the summer. I saw him go against some really good DBs from Alberta, and I saw him catch a short ball and absolutely take off from everybody. And this young man is 6'2", 6'3", so he has a crazy frame. So anyways, a big shout out to Coach Cartwright, who's doing the right things at Kelowna, and to Nolan Alm.
And that's a program always worth mining for talent. Even when on the field, the team performance isn't necessarily the best. I mean, they've moved themselves up a little bit this year. They've had a pretty good year. But there's been some pretty lean years at KSS in recent memory. But the one thing they've always done is they've always consistently produced talent. There's lots of kids going through that school. I mean, a lot of times in high school football, it's a numbers game as to how many kids you get going in the door. It's a huge school, and there's always talent coming out of there. I remember even dating back to my time in high school, there was a bunch of guys that went junior. A couple went to Calgary. there's always talent.
Well, ones that don't necessarily specialize in football either. Parker Simpson comes to mind as a guy that was a basketball player as much as he was a football player.
And now he's back to being a basketball
player.
Back
to being
actually.
a basketball player.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have that athletic versatility coming out of a program like that.
Absolutely, and I mean, when you're trying to build a program at a big school, that's sometimes your strategy as a coach too, is go out and get those kids that you know are athletes for you. And I mean, that's one of the things that I was fortunate to be able to do a little bit of at my school, is forge a relationship with the basketball program and pull some of their guys.
Some of the guys,
yeah, and that gets you kids that you have coming in the door that you know how sports work and know athleticism and competition. So that's always a plus. So I mean, I don't know much about Nolan Ulm in terms of what he's doing off the football field, but one thing I will say is, like, as a recruiter, KSS always a place to pay attention to, because they're still the big school in Kelowna, despite Rutland and Mount Boucherie also playing as well. So.
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm totally impressed with his size, and his size and speed ratios. Like his numbers are impressive. Moving along, we're going to transition from high school now. We're going to talk about CJIP. I love talking about CJIP because it's such good football. Offensive performer. We went through the stats. We checked out the game logs, and there's a running back from John Abbott who's kind of on an upswing the last 2 or 3 years after a couple of rough years. His name is Elijah Williams. He carried the ball 21 times for 221 yards and 2 touchdowns, which was totally impressive. But however, the most impressive thing about the CJIP performances that we tracked this week, there is an undersized defensive tackle. His name is Merrick Hamlin. He goes to Lionel Group. He's 5'11", 245 pounds, so he's not a big dude. He had, as a defensive tackle, 11 solos, 9 assists, 2 quarterback sacks, and 4 TFLs. So to put that in perspective, if my middle linebacker had that type of game, I would be impressed. The fact that an interior defensive lineman had that type of game, I'm willing to say that if I watch the film, he's probably got an outstanding takeoff.
Yeah, well, we were just talking about that when we were talking about Ald at St. Thomas More. Same type of thing, probably a guy that can slash through the middle of that line. And I mean, it's tough when you're an offensive line. Like I said, you're preparing for 290, 300-pound guys every week, and all of a sudden you see a guy that just has a completely different skill set in there. That can sometimes be tough, but I mean, you got to give the kid credit for the run stops. And for just sticking in there every week. I mean, Lionel Grew is a pretty decent team. It's not like he's just kind of the only body that a team has. He's probably beat competition even within his own locker room that is bigger in size than he is, but it's got that toughness aspect is just super impressive for a kid in that situation.
By the way, we've got about a dozen people that have joined us here, so they're more than welcome to ask a question online if you're in the room here. On Facebook Live during the session, and we'll do our best to answer that.
Yep.
Yeah, we can see. We may not be paying attention, but we can see the comments come up. So.
Oh yeah,
Sharik Khan, I see you.
Who? Oh, Kim Shoot. David Stubbs, yes, your son is an outstanding running back. Anyways, moving on. So we're going to transition.
They told us to be more interactive this week.
Yeah, we're working on it.
If you really got to know me, you would understand that I am not interactive at all. So there you go. There's your shout out for your son. Okay, moving along. We have a section each week. We call it Offer That Guy. All right. So we're batting 2 for 3 or 3 for 4. We didn't get it last week. However, I'm going to talk about a young man who's from Quebec who went all the way down to New Mexico Military Institute. He's a SAM/safety. He plays kind of in that 4-2-5 system, so he's an outside linebacker/safety. His name is Enoch Mekons. 5'11", 195. He was the leading tackler on one of the top JUCO programs in the United States. He had 34 solos, 37 assists, and 10 TFLs. If you get a chance to watch his film, watch his film. He is simply outstanding. The way he chases the ball, the way he closes in space, the way he tackles in space. The fact that he had 72 total tackles and 10 TFLs, I don't understand why at this point, other than the fact he's 5'11 or 5'10, 190, 195, why he's not getting any offers.
By the way, there are 18 Canadian players in JUCO right now. 9 of them are at New Mexico Military Institute.
He's not the only one. There's a bunch of kids at New Mexico Military Institute. They have one of the top nose tackles I've seen come out of Canada in a long time. I can only remember his name, Big Pappy, but take a look at the NMMI website and see the Canadians. For those coaches, those college coaches, both here in Canada and down in the States, who are working our lists, I would strongly suggest you spend the time, go on there, find that team, and then find Enoch Mekons. He is a keeper.
Well, and you've talked about him numerous times. One of the things that you really like about him, I think, too, you said, is his versatility. You can use him in different situations. He kind of profiles as a little bit short in length, but kind of profiles as one of those modern Sam, slide out into the nickel, that kind of type of guy that a lot of defenses can really make great use of.
Yeah. Oh, and like he arrives at the ball carrier with bad intentions. Like you always watch players and they flash. And they'll flash and they'll fly and they knife people when they hit them or they completely blow them up. He has those intangibles. Just like Sammy Sadu did for me last year, who's now at the University of Calgary. Love you, Sammy. Anyways, moving along. From offer that guy to the fast riser, or as I've come to call it, the young buck of the week. There's a young man, defensive end, Aaron Armitage. He is a CFC 100. However, he's a class of 2021. Today, well, let me back up a bit. He went down to Blair Academy in New Jersey. However, Aaron today got his first Power 5 offer, and in fact, his first offer, period, from the University of Virginia. So he's our young buck or our fast riser. If your first offer is like a Power 5 team, and their Jim said they're ranked 16th or 20?
No, they were ranked 25th last week.
Yeah.
Lost a tough one to Pitt. They're
Okay.
now 6-3 overall, but really, really good season for the Cavs, who had kind of hovered around 500 for a number of years. It looks like they're ready to take that next step. There's kind of a vacuum in the ACC, so I mean, I know we're not focusing on how the college teams are doing right now, but that's a legit offer from, as you said, a Power 5 team.
Power 5 team.
It's worth noting that in that game, Terrell Jana finally had a breakout game at receiver. I think he had 6 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown in that game. We've been waiting for him to have a game like that for Virginia,
Well,
out of Burnaby, BC.
There seems to be kind of an interesting pocket in Virginia. You know, Richmond's recruited a few Canadians as well.
Yes.
Episcopal there has brought down a number of Canadians as a prep school. So there's kind of a random, maybe it's not random and I just don't know the reasoning behind it, but there's kind of a pocket there where Canadians seem to be making their mark. There's a few guys in North Carolina just south of there as well. So
Patrice Rene is one
Exactly.
guy that comes to mind
Yeah.
at North Carolina, who's an outstanding defensive back.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of interesting, but good for the Cavs, and if they are in fact paying attention, somebody on their staff is paying attention to this program. I mean, I got to commend American programs that are starting to pick up on this, because it's a new avenue for recruiting, and in such a competitive world where they're looking for an edge, to find a new frontier that might be underserved in the recruiting market. Well, good on you.
Yep. Well, just case in point, this week or over the course of the last 7 days, Delaware State, who's hit pay dirt with Chris Ike, has now realized that there's a lot of really good football players in Canada, and I think they had 3. They offered 3 different Canadians this week. Or no, I think they offered more, because they just offered the 2 kids down at Butler or Highland, the 2 brothers from Egypt. They're from Momo. They went down to Ajuka. They've offered literally like 5 Canadian players over the last 7 days. So, I mean, that just kind of shows you. I know there's more teams who are working the CFC 100, working the CFC 60. I would strongly encourage them to go right down the list, because they have a bad habit of stopping around 50. So, I mean, good for back to Aaron, though. He's only 2021, so he's 10. He's basically 10, 11. So he literally has 2 seasons left prior to actually get into his junior or senior year, where he's going to be heavily recruited. This will no doubt lay the foundation for offers to start coming in for him.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep. So that kind of brings our players of the week. That brings offer that man, Enoch Mekons, one more time. All right, our fast riser. Okay, recruiting tips. We're gonna cycle back to where we were last week. We were talking about, are you a Division I prospect or are you not? We went through some numbers super quick, and we told you that less than 1% of the athletes who play in North America, so that would be US and Canada, actually will be offered a full scholarship. We also talked about how many athletic programs there are, 1,900, that actually in North America have athletic programs. 94% of those 1,900 are not Division I. All right, there's basically 1.1 million high school players in North America, and only 3,000 of them will actually get offers. So just keep that in mind. And then we talked about some of the things you need to do as a prospect. And the first point we touched on was be realistic. The second thing, Jim liked that one, was listen to people with experience. All right, the third one was don't listen to the uneducated. Don't listen to your parent agent all the time. Listen to your parents. Don't listen to the parent agent. And don't listen to anybody who trains you or you pay money to train you, because if they are giving you advice, make sure it's realistic advice. The next point, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it, was if you don't get that offer or that full ride, probably some of the best educational opportunities you're going to have are here in Canada. Why would you go to a directional school, all right, who's going to offer you half, and you're going to pay like $35,000 or $40,000 with the exchange rate, when you can stay in Canada and get a fantastic education? And if you're fortunate enough, you'll get an offer from a U Sports school, and if that goes through, you might get your tuition paid. If you're going to Ontario, I don't know how it works nowadays, but you'll probably get your $4,000 or your $5,000. Hopefully you get a work study too, not to throw out there how that works, but hopefully you get those things and you understand that it doesn't always have to be down there. It can stay here, and it's a fantastic opportunity. The last thing I'm going to say is if you have an opportunity to go to a school, so you're going to reclass, you're going to go do the prep thing, there's fantastic options in Canada now, which there have been in the past, but now they're more dialed in and they're more structured. And they're playing games against opponents that will allow you to get the necessary film you need. Don't go to a prep school, all right, if you have to move all the way down to the United States and pay the full load. I would strongly encourage you to not do that. You're going to have the options here in Canada, and then if there is a school down there, well, if they want to come up and recruit you, it should be an offer that's going to allow you and your family to do it and not go into debt. So those are a couple key points.
And understand, like you can stand out at your own high school.
Oh, yeah.
These prep schools, in a lot of cases, need you more than you need them.
Yeah.
That's kind of the attitude that you need to go into the process with, because don't get me wrong, there are some great fits down there for prep schools. You know, I think of Javon Jacobson, the kid from here locally, who is absolutely thriving at Clearwater Prep in Florida right now. But so those are some great situations, but don't. Like Clint was saying, don't put yourself into a situation where you are dumping a whole bunch of money into this prep thing, because the ROI, as they use in the business world, the return on investment there is probably not as high as it would be spending that money on going to a couple of smart selected camps and staying in your own high school program and excelling on the football field here. In the internet age where you can market yourself, that prep experience isn't necessarily as valuable as the price tag attached to it at times.
And as much as you guys love football, and as much as we love football, that investment really should be going into your education. And if you can get something back from a U Sports school, 33.6 scholarships are offered by each U Sports school, which are partials, they're not full ride, but the money is there, and there are secondary opportunities there to make some money in the off season as well.
And I will say, like, repatriating to Canada after your football career is done, when you, and this is not a glamorous subject, but once football's done for you and you have to move into the professional world, if you're planning on repatriating back to Canada and using that degree from Eastern Michigan, you know, that's going to likely put you at a competitive disadvantage in a lot of industries versus having a Canadian degree from any of the major Canadian universities.
And there's a last point, just because...
No slight to Eastern Michigan specifically, by the way. That's just, he talked about directional schools. That's what we mean by directional schools. Northern, middle, southern, western, eastern, Arkansas, State, A&M, whatever.
Yeah, Western Michigan, though. No, sorry, that's just a joke.
Anyways, just one last point is just, you have to understand, and I'm just going to go back to the prep schools, if you got to go down to pay, your better option is in Canada. And then the last thing I'm going to say about the American schools, there is not all the universities in Canada. There are some universities in Canada. If you go down, and I know the case was definitely at McGill, if you went down and played at a school, a high school in the United States, or that prep school in the United States, and then you try and bounce back, or you come back to go to school in U Sports, you would have to write, even though you're a Canadian citizen, you'd have to write the SATs in order to get into that Canadian school. So keep that in mind, especially if you're somebody who struggles in English. You may have to very well go that route just to get back into a school in Canada, which if you had stayed here in Canada, you never would have had to do that. So just food for thought. I know it's not applicable to all schools, but it does happen, and I know some of the schools do expect it. So keep that in mind when you're looking at those schools. That kind of ties up what we're going to do. Hopefully that's covered it off. Like I always say, if you have more questions about it, you can email us at CFC. There's that tip, and there's other recruiting tips you can always find at the recruiting tips on the CFC website, CanadaFootballChat.com website. Other than that, that kind of ties it up what we're doing for tonight, and then I'll turn it over to Jim, and he can get us out of here.
Yeah, you see that back there. It's Crown Countdown U. It's available on cbcsports.ca on Wednesdays, but it's also available on CHCH Television, 11:30 Eastern Time, right after local news. That's where most of the people watch it on the
That's the
old
only
television.
time zone that matters, Jim.
That's right, Eastern Time.
Good luck. Good luck with
See
your
ya.
prep. Good luck in the playoffs.